one of the things that we as penetration testers need to know is navigating through the system with the help of a command line. Now, this is a prerequisite that we're going to cover, so if you're already familiar with Linux and terminal commands, feel free to skip these few lectures that we will devote to it. Okay, now, for those of you who are not familiar with terminal, you are probably wondering, why do we need to learn this? What is the purpose of using a command line? Well, terminal, as we already mentioned, is a command line interface that allows us to control and navigate through the system. It isn't a graphical user interface, so it's rather simple. You type in a command and you get the output. In Linux systems, it's called terminal, while in Windows systems, it's called command prompt. Now, one of the reasons why this is important for us is when you gain access to the target during your penetration test, you won't really get a desktop access to it. You won't be able to see all the icons, the programs, its desktop. None of those things will be visible to us. Instead, we will control their system with a command line tool by running different commands. With time, you will start using terminal more and more, and you will get better and better. But for the purposes of this course, we're just going to cover some basic commands in this section, and we will also learn a couple more advanced commands during the course. So let's start by checking how we can open the terminal inside of our Kali Linux machine. There are a couple of ways that we can do this. If we go up here, we're going to see a couple of icons, and this icon right here is actually terminal. As you can see right here, it says terminal emulator. If I click on it, it will open the terminal tool. Here it is. Now, there are a few things that we can see right here. We can see the name of our account that we created during the installation of Kali Linux, and we can see the path right here in the brackets, and this is the path in the system. Now, before we run any command right here, let me just explain this path a little bit more, just so we can fully understand it. So I'm going to close the terminal right here, and that path that you saw depends on where you open the terminal. For example, I can also go on my desktop, right-click, and go open terminal here. You will notice we will open everything that looks the same except this path. We open terminal in /desktop directory. And you can do this in any folder that you want. You can go in home directory, open terminal there. You can go in downloads directory, documents directory, and the path to that directory will be written in these square brackets right here. Okay, another way that you can check the full path to the directory that the terminal is opened in is by typing the command pwd. If I press enter, it will give me the full path to the desktop directory, which is /home, /Mr. Hacker, and /desktop. Now, to see the contents of the directory that you're inside, you can type the command ls. And you will notice once I type this command, it will be an empty list, since there are no files or folders in the desktop directory. But this doesn't mean that all the other directories are also empty. For example, we can also open another terminal, which will be in this directory right here and not in desktop directory. And if I type ls here, well, now we get some response back. We get a list of other subdirectories that are inside of this directory right here. And we also get the desktop directory. So we can conclude that this desktop directory that we are inside in this first terminal is actually a subdirectory of Mr. Hacker. Now, to navigate inside of one terminal between multiple directories, we can use a command cd. And let me just show you right here, so I'm going to close this one. Let's go back to the one that is in the desktop directory, and we can use the command cd, and then, for example, /home. You will notice instantly that the path changes. We're no longer inside of /desktop, we are in /home. And we can prove it by typing pwd, which will tell us the directory name. By the way, if I didn't mention, pwd stands for print working directory. Now if we type ls here, well, we get only one response, which is Mr. Hacker. So how can we go to this Mr. Hacker directory? Well, we can also use cd and then Mr. Hacker. And we're back to Mr. Hacker directory. If I type ls, you will see an already familiar response. Okay, but how can we go one directory back, for example? Let's say we are currently in Mr. Hacker directory and we want to go back to /home directory without having to type cd and then /home. Let's say we don't know what is the directory name and we want to go one directory back. Well, we can do by typing cd and then 2 dots. If I press enter, you can see that we're currently back in /home directory. So the command cd and then 2 dots actually puts us one directory back. Okay, awesome. Now that we know these commands, let's navigate to /home, /Mr. Hacker, and then let's go to the desktop directory of Mr. Hacker. Now let's cover a new command, a command that will allow us to create files. That command is called touch. Now, touch creates empty files, and all we need to do to create an empty file is type touch and then the file name. Let's call it file1. If I type ls again, and remember ls is a command that will list all the files and directories inside of the current working directory, now we get a response. We have file1 inside of our desktop directory. And even if I go and lower this terminal, you will see the file1 on our desktop. So we successfully created it. Now, the same way that we can create files, we can also create folders. The command to create a folder would be mkdir, which stands for make directory, folder1. Now, keep in mind this file1 and folder1 you can name anything you like. This is just a name that you give to your file /directory. And if I type mkdir folder1, I lower my terminal. Now we have folder1 on our desktop. And we will also see it if I type ls. As we can see, we have file1 and folder1. Another useful command would be to copy files. So let's say we want to copy this file1 inside of folder1. How can we do that? Well, we use the command cp. And it works like this. We type cp and then the file that we want to copy and then the location where we want to copy it. In our case, we can specify cp file1 to folder1. Now, we don't need to specify the full path to folder1 because the folder1 is already in /desktop directory. But if folder1 was in some other directory, we will have to specify the full path to it in order for this file to be copied to the correct location. So let's press enter. If I type ls, we will still have file1 in our desktop directory, but if we also cd to folder1 directory and type ls, well, we have file1 in folder1 directory as well. So we successfully copied it. Now, compared to the copy command, we also have the move command. It does the same thing, just it doesn't copy, it simply just moves the file from one location to another. So once you use the move command, the file will no longer be in the first location that it was at, rather it will be in the location that you moved it to. So let's see how that works. Let's say now we want to move the file1 from the folder1 to the home directory. We can do that by typing mv, which stands for move, file1, and then to /home directory. If I press enter, it gives me permission denied. Now, permission denied is something that we will talk about in the next lecture. For now on, let's just forget it and we will get to it in the next lecture. Let's just change the path where we want to move our file1, so we can type move file1 to /home /Mr. Hacker. Okay, this one worked. We didn't get any error that says permission denied. So now let's see whether we first have the file inside of folder1. If I type ls, you will notice that our file is no longer here. So we moved it. Now let's see whether we moved it to the correct location. We can copy this location and type cd and then /home /Mr. Hacker. If I type ls here, well, here is our file1. We successfully moved it to the /home /Mr. Hacker directory. Now, another interesting command that we can use is called echo. If I type echo and I type, for example, hello world, like this, so echo, open double quotes, hello world, and then close double quotes, it will just print out hello world inside of our terminal. But if I do something like this, echo, hello world, and then I use double arrow to the right, and then our file1, well, we don't really get anything printed out. But what did we do right here? Well, in this command, we actually used this string and we put it inside of file1. So now file1 is no longer an empty file. It contains this text. How can we check it out? Well, we can check out what are the contents of file1 with the help of another command. And that command is called cat. So cat file1 will print out the contents of that file. If I press it, here it is. We can see the content of file1, which says hello world. Now, you can also check the contents by going and visiting file1, like this, even though it will be empty because we actually inputted our string in file1 in /home/MrHacker directory and not in /desktop directory. But nonetheless, you can also enter something here if you want. But it's important that we get used to using terminal instead to do these simple tasks. So now that we learned how we can create empty files, how we can write things in empty files, and how we can actually switch between different directories, how we can copy files, move files, and all of that, let's also see how we can delete files. For example, we're in our /home/MrHacker directory, and we can confirm that once again by typing pwd. And let's say we want to remove this file1. We no longer need it, so let's just remove it. We can use the command rm. And after the rm command comes the file name. So if I type rm file1, press enter, and then ls again, we no longer have file1 in this directory. However, we do still have it inside of our desktop directory. So let's delete it here as well. To go to desktop directory, I can type cd /home/MrHacker/desktop. If I type ls, we have file1 in folder 1, and I can type remove file1 or rm file1. Let's also try to do that with folder 1. If I type remove folder 1, we get an error. Cannot remove folder 1, it is a directory. So how can we remove directories? Well, instead of just typing rm and then the directory name, we can type rm folder 1 and then at the end we add -r. With this command, we can remove a directory. If you notice, when I type ls, we no longer have file1 or folder 1. Okay, I hope you understood all of this. Now don't worry if this seems a little bit confusing to you. Make sure that you practice these commands. Make sure that you practice navigating with cd command, creating files, deleting files, copying files, and all of that. And in the next video, we'll continue with some new commands that we can use inside of our terminal. Okay, awesome. See you in the next video. Okay, so we have covered a few commands in the last video. Let's learn a little bit more just so we can feel confident when we get to use our terminal later in the course. Another important command that you will use a lot is called sudo. Now, sudo allows us to run certain commands as root account, or in other words, as an administrator account. For those of you who don't know, root account on Linux is something similar as administrator on Windows. So let's check sudo command by running it with another familiar command that we already covered, which is touch command. So if I type sudo and then touch and then file1, let's see what will happen. So I'm just going to press enter. It asks for password, which makes sense because we're actually trying to create a file with elevated privileges. So the actual password that you want to type here is the same password that you used once you created an account during the installation of Kali Linux. So I'm just going to type mine right here. and the file has been created. We can check it by typing ls, and now that we created file 1 with elevated privileges, you will also notice that on desktop, if I lower my terminal, this file 1 has a lock on its icon, as we can see right here. This means we cannot change content of that file as a regular user. Let me show you what I mean. If I also go and create a file as our Mr. Hacker account, just by typing touch and then file2. Here, if we take a look, this file2 won't have any locks on its icon. This is a file that we created as a regular user. Okay, we'll get back to this in just a second. For now, another useful command that I want to show you is called nano. Nano is a text editor. Once you open a file with nano, you will be able to write text there, or even code if you're creating a program. Let me show you how it works. So if I go to my terminal and I type nano file2, which is the file that we just created, it will open a window that looks like this. Here we can write anything we want. Let's say we want to write hello world. How is your day going? Okay, just a simple sentence. We can save this and then we can see whether we managed to write it using the cat command. So to save a file in the nano editor, you type Ctrl-O. Then once this pops up, you press enter, and then you can press Ctrl-X to exit out of nano editor. To make sure that we typed something inside of our file, we can cat it like this, so cat file2, and here we have our sentence. Hello world, how is your day going? Okay, awesome. But if we try to do the same thing with file 1, it will open this window, but as you can see, it won't work. It will tell us down below that this file is unwritable, as we can see right here. Why is this? Well, this is because we don't have enough privileges to change the contents of this file, or to write any new content. Remember, we created it with sudo command. So how can we write to it? Well, we can run nano with sudo command. Let me show you what I mean. If I type sudo nano and then file1, now it works. We don't get the error down here, and we can also type something like today is Tuesday. We can save it with Ctrl-O, press enter, and then Ctrl-X to exit. If we cat file1, now we also have the content written inside of our sudo file. So this is a way that we can actually create a file that cannot be accessed by a regular user. You would need sudo privileges to open and write to that file. Okay, but there is also another command that we can run to elevate our privileges, and this command is called sudo su. If I type sudo su, this command, instead of elevating our privileges for just one single command that we want to run, this will give us root account terminal. As you can see right now we have Mr. Hacker terminal, but if we run sudo su, now we get root terminal. We see it's not really the same. We have Mr. Hacker right here, while as here we have root name and we get this cool skull icon right here. But be careful while using root terminal, because with this terminal you can actually delete any file that might be crucial for the operating system, or you can make any changes whatsoever. There is no limitation. You can delete the entire operating system if you want. So only use this when you know what you're doing and when there are a lot of commands that you need to run with sudo, so in that case you can open a root terminal and run those commands and then exit out of the root terminal. Now you might be asking, well, how can I exit once I entered? Well, it's simple as that. Simple as typing exit. And we get back Mr. Hacker account. And let's also mention the last command for this video, probably the one that you will use more than any other command, and that is clear. Now, clear simply does as it says. It clears our terminal window. Perhaps you ran too many commands and you're looking at a lot of output that you no longer want to read, or you no longer need it at all. Well, simply by typing clear and pressing enter, we can get rid of all of that and get fresh and clean terminal window. Awesome. You're starting to get a hang of this. As you can see, terminal is not that hard to use. It will take some time for you to get used to these commands, but eventually it will become second nature for you. Okay, so there's one more video to cover for terminal, and we're left to cover some other commands aimed at networking and discovering our IP address, and so on and so on. So practice a little bit with these commands that we already learned in past 2 videos, and I will see you in the next one. Welcome back. So we can say that we covered some of the most known commands that are commonly used inside of a terminal. But what is important for us as penetration testers are also the commands that are more aimed at networking. For example, throughout the course, we'll constantly be checking IP addresses. Whether it being our IP address or target IP address, it doesn't matter. We will check it through terminal. The most important command that we use to do this is called ifconfig. Now, ifconfig gives us an output of all our networking interfaces as well as their IP addresses if they have one. Let's give it a try. So if I open my terminal and I type ifconfig, usually most of you will get rather the same output. Now, some of you might have an interface more or less, but usually in Kali Linux we will have these 2 main interfaces, ETH0 and loopback interface. Now, ETH0 is where I connect over the internet, and we can actually find our IP address under the INET tab. It's usually going to be in the second row, and we can see that my local IP address is 192.168.1.10. Now, more about IP addresses you can read from our networking PDF file, where we actually explain different types of IP addresses, how they look like, and between which ranges do they go. But if you want to check your own IP address or your Kali Linux machine, you can just type ifconfig command and it will be under one of the interfaces. Usually it will be under ETH0. And this is how we actually discover the IP address of our own device. However, to discover an IP address of another device, such as for example an IP address of a website, well, we can use different tools for this. One of the most known one is called NSLookup. But for some of you, the NSLookup tool might not be installed, and this is a perfect moment to show you how you can install different missing packages or tools with the help of terminal. So let's first clear our screen and install our NSLookup tool. The command that we usually use to install a package or a tool is called apt-get install. After apt-get install comes the tool name. In this case, since we want NSLookup, and NSLookup comes in a package called DNSUtils, we want to type apt-get install DNSUtils. Now, keep in mind that these commands must be ran with sudo privileges, at least in this current version of Kali Linux, so let's add sudo before the entire command. And let's press enter. It will ask us for our password, we will just input it right here, and it has finished. Now there are 2 outputs that you will get. Either it will install the tool, or you will get the similar output to mine right here, in case the tool is already installed, which in my case it is already installed. So now that we have it installed, let's try to run it. Let's say we want to discover one of the IP addresses of Google. We can type NSLookup and then google.com. We press enter, and in less than a second we will get an output. You can try this on any website in order to get their IP addresses, or one of their IP addresses, which is the case that we got right here. So we performed NSLookup on google.com. It gave us the output that the name that we searched for is google.com and that the IPv4 address is this one right here. Now, this is not the only Google address, this is just one of them, so you might get a different response It might be that if you scan this multiple times during the day that you will be getting a different IP address for Google. You can also do something like this for Facebook or any other site whatsoever, and you will be getting their IP address as well as their IPv6 address that we can see right here. Okay, awesome. Now, same thing that we did right here, we can do with the command called host. For example, if I type host, but let me just clear the screen first, host google.com, it will give me a slightly different output, but more or less it gives us the same thing. As we can see, it gives us the IP address of Google, and we can already see that it is different than the previous one. This is the IPv4 address that we got for Google. The IPv6 address that we got for Google is this one. And we also get by which domain our mailing services handled. Okay, this is how we can discover an IP address of a website. But let's say that you want to, for example, discover IP addresses of all the devices that are online inside of your network. For this, we're going to go a little bit more advanced and touch on a tool called NetDiscover. Now, this tool we will also mention during the course, but let's just take a peek at it right now. It should be installed in Kali Linux by default, but if it isn't, you can use the previous command that we covered, which is apt-get install, to install NetDiscover tool. Now, in order to run it, after you have it installed, all you have to do is type NetDiscover. But once again, this being a tool that requires sudo, we must add sudo prefix to our command. If I press enter, well, that's it. Now we just leave it for a couple of minutes. It will scan all ranges of local IP addresses until it gets to your network range. Once it gets there, it will output all active IP addresses that are on your local network. Awesome, right? You can say that we just covered our first useful tool. Nonetheless, you get the point. We have many useful commands and tools that we can run inside of a terminal. And during the course, we will discover much more that you will use a lot. My advice would be that you spend a couple minutes every day practicing these commands that we covered, as well as researching some new commands that might interest you. For example, you can say, I wonder how I can discover what version of Linux am I running. Then you Google that exact question and you should find the command uname-r for discovering Linux kernel version. And let's just give it a try just for fun. You can see these are all the active devices on my network, so we can Control-C this. We no longer need it to scan the network. And to discover the kernel version of Linux, we type the command uname-r and we get the output. And this is how you learn. Anyway, if you have any questions regarding terminal or the commands that we covered, feel free to ask. In the meantime, we are one step closer to our goal of becoming a penetration tester. Let's continue to the next lecture. Congratulations, you did it. You went through the entire course and now you can proudly call yourself a bug bounty hunter. Of course, there's still a big road ahead of you. Everything we covered and beyond will require a lot of practice in order to really master it. But you're on a good way. In this course, we covered some of the most important bugs out there, but there are many more to discover, and for this, you will have to combine your knowledge that you gained with creativity in order to find them. If you enjoy the course, one helpful thing you can do is perhaps drop a kind word about the course to your friend, as you never know, they might also want to become a bug bounty hunter. A kind review also helps us out, as it tells us that you found the course useful. Nonetheless, once again, good job. You did it till the end. Your journey starts here. I'm sure that you will become a great bug bounty hunter. Thank you for watching and happy hacking.